Hello, and thanks for stopping by. In this video, I'm showcasing the 4 favorite ways I like to color my stamps. And I think my opinions are a little bit controversial, but I rank them from least enjoyable to most enjoyable for me based on how they turn out. So let's get into it. In 4th place and last is ink blending. And I know this is a popular choice for a lot of card makers, but for me, I find I can never quite get the blending the way I want it to turn out. I either choose the wrong colors or I lightly blend one color but then overblend the second color, and it just doesn't ever turn out the way I want. And also, for some reason, when I stamp and then try to align the stencil, it never quite lines up right, so I'm often having to shift it. Now, in this card example that I'm doing on the screen right now, it's actually probably the best ink blending over a stamped image I've ever done, and I think it's probably because I chose 4 colors within the same color family. And so I just focused on the lightest to darkest, and perhaps in the past I think I picked colors that were, reds and oranges or oranges and yellows, so they weren't quite the same color and they didn't end up blending them particularly well. But I do like how this ended up. It's just not typically my favorite technique. It's definitely something I don't gravitate towards, just because I can't seem to quite get my blending right. So in this, I'm using different shades of purple and just following the stencil guidelines. They're sort of etch marks that tell me kind of where to place it and then the order in which I should go in. And I'm starting with that lightest color and then adding sort of a darker color, and then I'm even adding an even darker color, I think, on top of that or on the edges. So really trying to get some depth and dimension. The other thing that I find a bit frustrating, which is also a really good benefit of ink blending, is that I'll have put this color down, but then by the end it would be so much lighter that I don't feel like I have enough contrast. And I do feel like that happens in this example here, is that my end result is a little bit lighter than how I was doing this. And apologies for my head getting in the way. A lot of these techniques that I'm playing with require a lot of overhead visual view for my eyes, so sorry about that. And so yeah, I think this looks a little bit darker than how it ends up in the final card, although I do really like the final card. It's not my favorite technique, and so for some people it is, and for some people it isn't. And so just finishing up the ink blending here, but on my final card, which I'm not showing the whole creation of it, just focusing on the different coloring techniques. I had a sentiment that I stamped and die cut, and I sort of ink blended a different background and added some gemstones. So this is the final card. Again, didn't quite turn out as dark as it had originally been, but I think it turned out nicely. Now shifting into 3rd place is watercolor. So I have the same sort of frustrations with watercolor that I do with ink blending, that I can never quite get the shades or the colors or the blending that I want to. It's just not a technique that I am particularly gifted at doing. So in this example, I'm just trying to put some color down, take off some of the excess water, and I'm trying to follow an image on the packaging, so that's sort of why that sort of yellow spot is in the middle. But I just try to add it to the edges and kind of pull it forward, which is probably not the greatest watercolor technique, but I do really like the softness of watercolor, which I think is just really pretty, and I think turns out a little bit better for me. My final product I like generally a little bit more than I do with ink blending. And so I also added some watercolor splatter, which I'm really starting to get into. I think that has a really cool effect. And so here is the finished card. I have some stamped images in the background and a simple sentiment just to really make that card pop, but it really is the focal point of the watercolor image. And in 2nd place, I have Copic coloring. So I usually use my Copic hex charts to decide what colors I want, and I sometimes struggle with this because I always pick the wrong colors, but I have found that reds and corals and peaches tend to work out really well, so that's the color palette that I'm using. And I generally like to work in colors of 3, so I usually put down the light color, followed by the medium tone, and then the dark tone. And sometimes I'll add an even darker tone to sort of bring out a little bit more. So usually 3s or 4s. And yeah, I usually work in sort of phases. So I'll start with, 1 or 2 petals, and then move on to more petals as I sort of get going. But this process takes a really long time, so I've actually fast forwarded through a lot of this really quickly just to get through it all. It did take me probably 40-45 minutes, possibly even longer, to fully color this image. So it did take quite a bit of time. And after I die cut this image out, I realized I didn't like the stark white contrast. I was on my sort of dark red color card base. So I decided to go ahead and find a Copic marker color that matched the background, and I'm just coloring in the edges of this image. So I think that's one way to get around fussy cutting, and especially if there's images like this where there's white space sort of in the middle, that would be hard to fussy cut. This is a kind of a cool technique to match the color of the cardstock if you're using a colored cardstock. And so here is my final card. I added a sentiment and some red sparkly gems, and I really like how this Copic coloring turned out. And in first place is stamp layering. And I know that this is probably controversial, and I struggle with this as well, just showing my color palette here, because I find that it's really hard to get the images lined up. But I will say that when it works, it really works. I just love the way they layer on top of each other, and it's really easy for me to pick colors for this technique. I usually just pick a color family. In this case, I'm using sort of a teal, turquoise, aqua combo, and you just have to line them up, and then you sort of let the stamps do all of the work. But I do know that they can be really frustrating, and so when they don't work, it's really not my favorite, but when it does work, it really is my favorite. And so I really enjoyed this the most out of the 4 techniques that I'm showing in this video. It's really cool to see sort of the different layerings. And yeah, I know that's probably controversial. I have a tendency to always stamp some extras, so in case I mess up the lining up, I have some extras. So if the cardstock shifts, I usually have a little extra to choose from in the end, which I really like. This process can also take a long time, so I definitely fast forward and cut out quite a few steps here. But you get the gist of what stamp layering is. You just follow along on the guide and then layer with the. And even though this is my favorite, I do have a place in my crafting for all of them, and so it sort of just depends on my mood. And sometimes I feel like Copic coloring, and sometimes I feel like watercolor. Here's that finished card. The stamp layering. I love the way these colors turned out. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. I'd love to hear what your favorite stamp coloring techniques are. Leave a comment, leave a like, let me know what you're up to. If you like this video, want to see some more inspiration, check out some of my other card making videos.